streaming. And let me just push this on Twitter. And I think we should be live in a second or two. Let me just push this here as well. And yeah, Neil, we're live. This is it.
Okay.
No more rehearsal. No more preparation. You have trained for this moment, and now it's time to execute it.
I'm ready.
So welcome.
I'm ready. Yeah.
Welcome to Teach Me Something, Season 1, Episode 5.
Mm-hmm.
Today, Neil and I will be discussing a very, very cool topic. I think it's a very cool topic. So we'll be talking about Git and GitHub, and we will try to actually demo a pull request, which is something that is maybe a little bit intimidating, especially for beginners, because it's like, you know, you're out there touching someone else's project, worrying that you might ruin it forever or at least scar it. But we will guide you through this process. But before we start, Neil, would you just like to maybe introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do?
So I'm Neil Smith. The day job is I'm a senior lecturer in computer science at the Open University, and I do various other bits with outreach and training people and community support groups, and that's where we met Eva, because it was the Rails Girls Summer of Code. I was being a mentor for that, and then when you were doing Girls Code over in the UK, I helped out with that and coached on Django Girls and things like that. So
essentially,
doing that sort of thing.
Essentially, you had no choice, but to eventually.
Yes. Yeah, I was dragged kicking and screaming into doing these things. So yes, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And yes. I would say that also you are a fan of books, judging by your background, or is that like a Zoom background?
No, that is my bookcase. That's most of my gaming stuff. I think that's most of that's gaming.
Okay, so today we said we're gonna talk about Git.
Yep.
How would you explain, if to someone that has no idea about what Git is, maybe a beginner, how would you explain Git to them?
Okay, so Git is the terminology is a distributed version control system, which probably doesn't help explain anything. The version control bit is that as you're writing code, as you're developing a project, you can keep track of all the versions of it. And what that means is you can always go back to an earlier version. So if you're doing something and you say, okay, well, this is the release I'm doing at the moment, and I will have that mark that as a version, and then even when you carry on further development, you can always go back to that version that, say, released, and then work on that. But what it gets really useful for in terms of the open source development and things is that you can always go back to earlier stages when you make a mistake. So you can get something working and then think, oh, okay, I'll just add this extra bit, and you start working and you make some changes, you try some stuff out, and it doesn't work. And you've mucked up the whole project, and you think, now what do I do? I can't remember what I did, I can't remember what it was before, so I can't put it back, and it's all a mess. And with Git, you just say, oh no, I know it was working back at that version that I had, I'll just go back there, and I'll throw away all this stuff that doesn't work, and I'll go back to something that's good and known and working. So that means you can be quite a lot more adventurous when you're trying stuff out, because it doesn't really matter if you break anything, you just go back, you can undo everything.
But so, it sounds very useful, but why do you think that, because I think, and when I started, Git sounded very difficult and a little bit scary.
Yeah.
And now obviously I know it's super useful and all these things that it does, and it's a lifesaver, and like that's just the way you work now. But why do you think it has this reputation of like it's not accessible or beginner friendly?
Because it isn't really. because programmers do things in weird ways and want flexibility and power, Git is quite a powerful tool when you know what you're doing.
Right.
But it's not friendly. It doesn't guide you into using it very easily. And so you do actually have to understand quite a bit about what Git is doing and how it works and what it's trying to achieve in order to work out how to use it effectively. So if we're going to do a pull request thing, there's some changes in a minute, which we'll go through. I think when you first see that, it's just a case of, it's just a script and you follow, and there's very little opportunity to understand what's going on and why, because there's a whole bunch of concepts underlying this that you don't get at first.
Yeah.
And so you have to spend a fair bit of time coming back, understanding these concepts in Git, and then it all makes sense why it's doing things. Then you think, oh, that's a commit, that's a branch, that's a remote. The difference between cloning and forking, they all start making sense once you've got these ideas underneath it, and then you can start doing things. But none of those are obvious.
Yeah.
And also Git doesn't help that it's not necessarily the most accessible of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally, I remember when I was first trying to learn, and like you said, it was total script. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
It felt like there's 9,000 steps and never ending, and the terminal was just yelling at me, because also when you use it for the first time, there's some extra configuration and it's, like you said, very inaccessible. And it's odd also because Git is very, very powerful, but I feel like a lot of developers that I know use maybe 10 commands all the time, and are completely unaware of the rest of 300 pages of Git. So yeah, but that's why we're here to teach you. So for people that are maybe wondering how to contribute to open source or how to go about this whole Git and GitHub thing, hopefully today will bring some understanding to that. So Neil, do you want to start with the formal part, the official part? Yes, with your explanation of what we're going to be doing today.
Well, I thought, shall we get it over and done with, and we'll get the pull request done. We'll start with that. So then if nothing else, people get that idea.
Okay.
This is how you do it. And it's really easy, because I know you've been saying in previous streams that you want people to add notes and things and contribute and stuff and do all that. So I thought if we start with that, we can show people just how to do that bit.
Cool.
But that will be, to some extent, a case of we'll just follow these instructions and it will work. And then we can move on back to and this is what you're doing and what's going on underneath it and how these things work.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Let's do it.
That sound good?
Yes.
Right. So, shall I start sharing my screen, and we can have a look at?
Let's do it.
Right. Which one is it? It's this one. Hopefully.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So hopefully you can now see your notes repository.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's say I want to add some wonderful notes about this really great speaker I heard, Neil Smith, and so I'm going to add some notes to this.
Okay.
But what I can't do is just write them in here, because this is your repository and it's not mine, and you don't want rando men from the internet scrawling stuff in it. So what I need to do is I need to take a copy of your repository, and one that I can own, so I can then edit it and change things. And in the GitHub world, that's called fork. So that's what this button up here does. If I fork a repository, I take a copy of it from owned by someone else and copy it so it's now in my own area. So I'm going to fork it, and I've got a couple of identities, so I'm forking it to me. And it takes a few moments. Boom.
Nice.
And now this is my copy of your repository, and you can tell it's mine because up in the corner, that's my username.
Right.
It's no longer the include.js one. Okay? And now, because it's my repository, I can do what I want with it. I can muck around with it. I can create stuff. In this case, I'll create a new file. I will add some notes to this. So I'll press the create file button, and you do it 0520, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
the name, yep.
Neil, and you called it notes.md, don't you?
Yeah, notes.md, the markdown file, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so I'll create this file, and I have some notes I prepared earlier, rather than spending ages typing them, so I can create this.
Can you just explain briefly, like, the text here, it's kind of just normally written English of sorts, but it has some special
Yeah, so this
signage.
is a notation called Markdown. And so it has a couple of things. So these hash marks at the beginning show headers. The stars at the beginning are bulleted lists. And the square brackets and the round brackets here are for doing hyperlinks. So this is me on Twitter. And so Twitter will appear, and then we'll see this in a minute, but this is a link, and here's some resources. And I've got some stuff on my blog that I'm in the process of writing up at the minute of some more detail on this.
Okay.
So, but I've done this file, and now I want to add it into the repository and into the history. Remember, we're saying Git stores all the versions of files previously.
Yeah. So
the phrase that you use for that is commit. So I will commit this file to Git's repository, and add some explanation. Let's commit direct into the master branch. Which is a bad thing to do, but it's a start. It's not explain branches and things. So I've now got these notes.
Yeah.
I can do it, and then see here's a hyperlink. So this is a link, it goes out to Twitter, and there's bits on the blog and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So this is now my copy of it, and it's saying here, this branch is one commit ahead of the master. So that's one commit ahead of your version.
So the master being the original.
Yeah.
As in my version.
It's this one. It's the include.js is your username.
Yeah.
Master. So it's ahead of. So I've made a change which is ahead of your repository.
Yeah.
And now the way I get my changes included in your one is I have to ask you nicely.
Right.
Basically, and the way GitHub asks people nicely is a pull request.
Okay.
It's just this button, so I just press.
But isn't
pull
it
request.
like when I was starting Git and GitHub, and the wording pull request is so strange. Like, why can't you just say, I don't know, add, or how would you say? What would be a better way? But I just feel the terminology sometimes is unnecessarily. I mean, you do get super used to it eventually, of course.
Yeah.
But as a beginner, it's like, what is a pull request? Or even oftentimes people would just say, do a PR.
Yeah.
So now you know that whenever people say PR, in this kind of context, they mean pull request.
Yeah. Right. So it makes sense. Why is this taking so long? Oh, here we go. Okay. It makes sense from your point of view. So it's your repository.
Right.
So it's got Eva's repository. And what you want to be able to do is you want to take the changes I've made and pull them into your repository.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a pull. You're taking the stuff from mine and you're pulling it in.
Right.
So that's the pull side. But the pull request is that I'm asking you to do that pulling.
Right.
I can't do it for you because it's your repository, you're in control. But I'm asking you to do it. So I'm requesting you pull these changes in.
Right. Yeah, no, I guess it makes sense when you're the project owner and you like pull, but as a contributor, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
You're pulling.
Yeah, because you're offering something up, you're pushing at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and a push is something else entirely in Git terminology. So, but that's let's not go there.
Okay.
So this is just a bunch of stuff that GitHub is saying about what it is, and it's showing me exactly what the changes are in here. And so I now have this nice green create pull request button. So okay, and so I can put in, I can write the little messages to you about what it is and what I've done and why it's important and all this sort of stuff that allows you to make a decision about what to do with things. I can put all in here, and I now create the pull request.
Cool.
And it thinks, and it's going through. So this is now back. If we look up here, this is now back on your repository.
Right.
So this is something that the pull request now exists on your repository. You're in charge of it. And GitHub is saying nice things about the fact that you can include this quite easily and stuff like that. And then as it's going on, we can, in these comments, we can have a conversation, you and I, about what's going on in here. So if you've got some questions, you can put them in there. I send it back and I can respond. I could perhaps update things and stuff. There's a whole process that goes on with this pull request until eventually either you decide, yes, you like the changes where we've ended up and you'll accept them, you will pull them in, or you decide you don't like them and you'll close the pull request and tell me where to go.
Okay. In a nice way.
It depends. It depends how much I've annoyed you.
Okay. Cool.
So, but that's entirely your choice as to what you do with it. And until that gets done, these changes I've made are just in limbo. But that's all I need to do to add the changes to your repository.
So you forked again, a strange term, but you forked the original repository. So like you copied my directory, kind of, into your own user profile thing. So you have the exact same copy, but it's kind of like your username copy. And then that copy doesn't affect the original in any way. So you can do anything you want there. But you've added some useful files. And now you want me to be aware of the changes and say, hey, since you're already working on this document, I've added some changes. Would you like to add them so you don't have to do the work, right? Kind of.
Exactly.
Cool. So should we demonstrate how it looks on the other end?
Okay, so I'll stop sharing and then you can do your side.
I'm just wondering how I can do it. Maybe this is the bad time to do it. But because if I share, because I'm sharing the Zoom thing.
Okay, well, don't worry. Then
let's see. No, this is good. I have not tried it. I think what could go wrong? I'm not logged into my internet banking, so I should be fine.
Well, I can keep an eye on this on here.
No, it will be fine.
So I can see the changes happening. So if I continue to share my screen, and then you just accept the pull request. Oh, okay. We'll do that.
How's it looking?
Yep, that looks good to me.
But I'm not sharing it on the other screen. Where did it go? It's because I have two screens. I think this is better now. Let me just make it.
I'm still seeing your Twitter.
I've seen my Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, now I'm seeing the stream.
Yeah?
Yes.
So it's good.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So I am now in my repository. So I own this and I have this thing called pull requests, which before had a 0 and now has a 1. So I'm going to click on this. And I see that there is a new pull request called create node, so I can click on this again. And then it's gonna, so I have again this green action button of just merging. So merging would be
that just includes the changes.
Yeah. Yeah, and this kind of gives me a quick overview of, so the green is always added stuff and the red is deleted. So it says 9 what?
9 lines added.
9 lines added. It's a one commit, and I normally always look at like files changed just to have like a preview. Okay, I see some markdown, looks good. So I decide this is good. So then the only thing for me is to just merge it. I can again add extra nodes. So these are good if I want to, maybe I have a specific way of doing that.
We had this conversation this change is something you're happy with. Yeah.
And then it changes into, so now I have this merge thingy. I also have the option of reverting, which is also good because sometimes you do make a mistake or stuff doesn't look the way it should. But now if I go into include.js, so Neil's notes are now here. So I didn't do them. And if I click on it, I actually get a nice preview as well. So GitHub is very good at showing you the preview, so you don't get the markdown. So yeah, this looks good, looks solid.
Thank you.
Yeah, good work, Neil. Well done.
Yeah, that's nice. Nice to know. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions from the chat about the process, if there was any, because again, there's so many buttons, so many actions, and it can feel a little bit confusing in the beginning, but essentially the process is always the same, except like, so my project is very, very small, and that's why I also encourage people that maybe don't know how to use Git or GitHub to, like, I don't specifically need notes from you, but what I would like to encourage people that are not familiar with Git and GitHub is to learn via making pull requests to my repository, because I'll be happy to teach people. Okay, let me stop the screen share now. How? Okay, stop sharing. Yes.
Yeah. Yay! Yeah, and so the point is that when I did that pull request, I was no one special in terms of as far as GitHub is concerned, because I didn't have any special privileges. I didn't have any special permissions to use your repository or anything. I was just some person on the internet who wanted to contribute a change, and GitHub made it very, very easy to do that.
We have 2 questions, Neil.
Yep.
So speaking of this kind of conversation, right? Especially when you are, so we are friends, so like we can skip some communication kind of stuff, but do you have any tips on what to write into the text field when sending a pull request? Like how do you know what to write as you're sending a pull request? When you're dealing with like a complete stranger, how do you, what's a good practice? Thank you for the question.
Okay, well, I don't know, because for my sins, I don't actually use GitHub very much for doing contributing to open source stuff. I tend to use it myself. Neil, you're the
expert. Don't say those things.
Sorry, no, I don't. I should just make something up about how wonderful it is.
It is wonderful, though.
But the main thing is, if you're, hopefully, you're making a change for some particular reason. So there is something you're trying to do, something you're trying to improve by doing that. And it could be that you found a mistake in the documentation and you want to correct it. It could be you found a bug in the code and you think this is a change that will correct it. It could be you think that actually there's this extra feature which someone's developed but no one's written documentation for it yet. I can do that. So you just need to, it's just the standard or good communication thing. You need to say exactly what it is that you're trying to do, why this pull request is important, and why it's important and what you've done. But also tied into that, you can easily look at all the other pull requests previously. You can still go back to those, you can see what happened in those and what looked at them. And if it's a decent project, then they will have some description of what sort of things they're looking for. in their pool as contributions to their project. So have a look at those, and that hopefully will tell you a bit about how to structure that conversation so that you get a chance of contributing to it.
Yeah.
Random people off the internet just saying, I made some changes, they are good, isn't going to get you very far. So something a bit more, the other thing GitHub does is it has issues and things and bug trackers and stuff. So if you can say, it's about that issue, here's a bug that was in your system and you asked for someone to fix it, I fixed it, this is what I've done that makes that fix, then that makes it much clearer as to how you're going about doing things and what you're doing with it.
And we have another question, is there any downside to pressing that revert button?
So what revert does is, because Git has a history, and as soon as something's on GitHub, it's public. So what revert does is, okay. So you had your version of the repository before I made changes. So you had that version, and then I went and made some changes, and you pulled them in, and that was this is the version that we had to start with, and then my changes came in on top.
Yeah.
Okay. If you decide you don't like my changes, then you can't just throw away this commit, because other people may have started basing things on it. So once it's in that public history, it really has to stay there. And okay, you can muck around and get rid of it. That's one of the things like Git is powerful, but essentially it's a bad idea to do it, because someone may have based some work on what happened here.
Right.
But if you don't like it, then the revert essentially says it works out this difference between the two and works out how to undo them, and it creates a new commit which undoes those changes. So you made some changes and then you made some more changes to go back to the original position. So that's what revert does.
Right.
So the history will see that these changes appeared and then were discarded. So everyone can see that in history. But you still end up back up here with this good version, which is what you want for people to look at. And generally, people will look at the most recent version and base things off. So you want it to be in a good position.
Right. Sorry, another question. We have...
Yep.
So I had... so Agatha says, I had very little experience with Git and GitHub.
Yep.
And was only pushing to my own repo, which is totally normal when you're studying by yourself or something, or working on as a freelancer. I'm really confused about push and pull. So could you talk about commit, push, pull, merge? Just a for dummies version of what these mean. So commit, push, pull, and merge.
Okay. This is where we say we have to come back to get to these concepts and things.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got, it's somewhere around here, I've got some pictures of...
Great question, Agatha. Do not apologize. It's a
great question. It is a really good question, yeah. But it doesn't have a really easy, it doesn't have a 30-second answer.
But that's why we have an hour, Neil. Hello.
Yeah. Right.
And just to tell the audience that I told Neil, have 15 minutes of content ready, because the rest is going to be questions, and we're going to be going through the same concepts because they're so crucial, and there's always once you get through so commit, push, pull, merge, there are 4 out of 10 things that you really have to understand to be able to do 90% of the things that you want to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, right.
Are you ready, Neil? Did I buy you enough time?
Probably not. Okay, so let's try sharing a screen again, and this is going to bounce around all over the place.
Also, Git stash, please.
Say again?
Git stash. What does it do?
Oh, let's not go there.
Okay, we can mention it at the end. Yes. Okay. Do not worry. We'll get to it.
Right. Okay. So hopefully you can see this.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So we've got this little image on the side here. okay, which is a picture of the history of some repository I was working on. It's about doing code breaking and things, but don't worry about that. So each of these blue dots is a commit. So I make a little bit of change, and then record the state of the project at that point, and that's a commit. And then I'll make another change, another commit, and so on. And this forms a history going on. So each commit knows what came before, and as they're moving up, you can see that the changes are happening over and over. Okay?
Right.
So each commit is me saying, okay, now is a good time to record the state of things, hopefully because things are mostly working, and I want Git to remember this state of the project. And then I commit and say, remember what it looked like now so that I can come back to it should I need to. Okay, so that's the idea of what a commit is. Now, remember right at the beginning I said Git is a distributed version control system.
Yes.
So the distributed part is where the pushing and pulling comes in. So in the same, so when multiple people are working on something, we each have our own copy of the repository. So if you and I were working on a project together, then you would have your copy of the repository and I would have my copy of the repository, and they're completely independent. But they're sitting on our local machines and we can work on them and do stuff with it. And we can add commits all over the place and add things as we're working on bits. Okay? And now in theory, we could just shove those changes between our two repositories directly. And that originally was how Git worked. But then along came things like GitHub, which make that collaboration much easier. So there's a third copy of the repository which sits on GitHub. Okay, so I've got a copy on my machine, there's a copy on your machine, and there's a copy on GitHub. And they're three separate repositories, each with their own histories, each with their own set of commits, and each with their own existence. But each of them knows that the other one exists.
Right.
Okay, so let's say I'm working on my system and I make some changes and I update it and I've got this wonderful extra, feature. Let's say we're doing a website and I've now translated all the text into Klingon. And this is a really good thing.
Right.
You haven't got any of those changes because they're all sitting on my machine.
Right.
Okay, so at this point, now the other thing is because we're working together, this repository on GitHub is shared between us. We both have access rights to write changes to that repository. Because if we're working together, you and I trust each other, we're both able to write to that repository on GitHub. So I've done my translation to Klingon. I now want to share this with the world because why wouldn't I? So I'll take my changes and I push those changes up to GitHub. So I take the changes and I push them up to GitHub. And then the repository at GitHub absorbs those changes and they get reflected in that repository. Okay? And then for you to get them, you then pull those changes down to your version, to your local repository, and then you get to see those changes in there. So that's the push and pull process.
Again, it's not very intuitive, is it?
No. The terminology is confusing, but it's the same as pushing a file onto a server and then pulling it down again. You push a file up and then you pull it down.
We have a very good explanation about what a commit is from Vicky, who says a commit is very similar to a save point in a game.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. Why didn't I think of saying it like that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So So commit is a chunk of work that you do and you kind of save
Yeah.
with a description. So you
Yeah.
say, I added a button,
Yes.
commit.
Yes.
And then when I want the original, the original repository to have my changes, my cool button,
Mm-hmm.
I push those changes up.
Yes.
And then you also want to have those changes on your local machine,
Mm-hmm.
so you pull those changes down.
Yes.
But before, but we missed a step of merging, which is
Damn, you noticed. I was hoping we could ignore that.
merging, Neil.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just the concept of pushing and pulling.
Yeah.
Commit, push, and pull. Get that idea down first. Are we
Right.
happy with that idea?
Are we happy with that idea, chat audience?
Yes.
And before we have two questions.
Yeah.
If several participants work on the same file,
Yes.
how does Git handle that? So I work on a button,
Yeah.
you work on a button.
Yeah.
None of our changes are in the main original repository. What
Yeah.
happens?
Okay. This is exactly where merging comes into it.
Okay.
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 So.
And sorry, and another question. Can you undo a commit after so many commits before pushing? So can you, let's say I made a button and then I made a button. So I made a button, commit, boom.
Yep.
Then I made the button red, commit,
Yes.
boom. But then
Yep.
I decide I don't want the button to be red.
Mm-hmm.
Can I undo?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let me find another picture.
So we're looking at the GitHub thing right now.
Yeah. Are we?
Yeah, at your screen, I think.
Are we? Are we still? Are you still sharing my screen? I thought I stopped it. Okay.
I think yours. Okay, no, we're not. Okay, it just
Right.
kind of went there. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things going on. I just want these pictures, which unfortunately aren't very big. Let's see if I can. Oh no, because it's.
We have another observation. I think it's tutable.
Yeah.
So, working from the terminal.
Yeah.
The whole push and pull makes sense, but there's a question when you made the example commit to the interface.
Yeah.
How did that work? Like, because you didn't do any pushing, pulling there. You just created a new file and did a pull request.
Yes.
So.
Okay. So GitHub actually makes life easy for you. It does those things quite friendly. But as we were saying, there are these three repositories. Essentially, there's the one on my local machine, there's the one on your local machine, there's the one on the GitHub server.
Yeah.
Okay. And GitHub allows me to work directly on the one on their server, which is what I was doing. So I didn't need to do anything at that stage, just to make it easy. What I could do is I fork your repository, or even I just take a copy of a repository directly and put it on my machine, and then I can muck around with it and make changes and do lots of changes and then push it back up to GitHub and do all of that. But for that example we did at the beginning, it was enough to just use the very simple things that you can do with the GitHub
Makes
web
sense.
interface.
Yeah.
That was enough to show that off. That wasn't everything that Git does.
Perfect. Yeah, so it was kind of, so Agatha says, thank you, makes sense. And I would just add that is, so the way Neil did it is definitely doable for like when you do small changes or maybe like documentation or something like that. But most of the time you would want to have a local copy running, because oftentimes you also want to run the whole project on your machine to see the changes there. But for like small tech changes that we did earlier, that's totally, you can just do them in the interface. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, okay. Okay, how do we deal with the fact that we're working on the same thing together?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this is where the idea of branches comes in. Which is what this picture here is trying to show. So we've got a bunch of commits down here. Hopefully you can see the pointer.
Yeah.
So we've got these commits in the history, and then one set of commits changes and veers off, and we're calling it capitals. So this is a text file, and we're changing some stuff to capital letters. Okay. So I have a branch that handles all of that. And then we have another branch here called master, which is where I'm adding extra text to it. Okay, so just don't worry about what is going on, but the fact there's two sets of changes happening.
So maybe you're working on the fourth paragraph and I'm working on the uppercases?
Yes.
But we're working on the same project at the same time.
We're working on the same project, we're doing the same thing. So you're changing the formatting and correcting the spelling and all that kind of stuff. I'm adding extra new content to it. Okay, so we're doing those changes there. Now, the idea of the branch is that things that happen is almost like a separate copy of the repository, because each commit contains everything in the repository. Okay, it's the whole state of things, and then Git does some clever stuff so it doesn't actually just keep copying big chunks of things, but you can regard it as being the complete state of everything. So you're working on your branch, changing all the formatting and things, and I'm working on my branch, adding extra bits. And although we're actually writing to the same file, because we're on different branches, Git keeps those changes separate. So all the time we're doing that, we're not interfering with each other at all because we're on separate branches.
Cool.
Okay. And it even works for a single developer, because if I'm working myself on these two things, then I can have one branch which is fixing up the formatting and one branch which is adding the content, and I can keep switching between them as I'm working on bits. Okay, but there will come a time when we will have to bring these changes back together.
Right, so to merge them.
Exactly, that's one thing in Git that makes sense, is merging.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
So we merge those changes, and there is a command in Git called merge, which takes the changes from several branches and brings them together. Now, what Git does is that it's fairly smart doing that. So sometimes if it can work out, say if there's an HTML page and there's a button at the top that you've been working on in your branch, and there's a button at the bottom of the page that I've been working on in my branch, Git can work out that actually these two changes don't interfere with each other at all. And so it knows how to incorporate both changes into the merged file. So sometimes Git will just include those. You say, oh, that change there, that change there, don't interact with each other. I just put them both in the new file, and that's the merged file, and everybody's really happy.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Sometimes that doesn't work. So for instance, if we're working on the same button and you make it red and I make it blue, when we try to merge them, what color should it be? And Git can't help us with that. That's a conversation you and I need to have about what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's a merge conflict. So
yeah.
Git says, when you try and merge it, hang on, two people are trying to make changes that interfere with each other. A human now needs to get involved in sorting out what's going on. And that's when merge conflicts appear, and that involves someone going through and actually just seeing what changed, what did you change, what did I change, what should the consensus be, and then they'll manually assemble that merged version. But what Git does is it tells you just where the changes are that I need to pay attention to. I don't have to go through line by line of every single line of code in the whole code base.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that concept, like you said, merge actually sounds like what it does.
Yes.
There's still like the whole. I remember when I was learning Git and GitHub, like master, like what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And because it's odd, because you can have a master and I can have a master. Like, I would think there's just one master, which would mean this is the holy copy that we don't touch.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be many.
Well, it's back to this distributed model. It's a distributed version control system. Your copy of the repository is yours, and mine is mine, and the one on GitHub is on GitHub, and what is it? Agatha's copy of it is her copy, and they're completely independent. And so, anything, if you call a branch or a commit or something by a particular name, if you call it master or you call it thread or you call whatever you want to call it, or blue buttons are cool or whatever, that naming has no effect on anything I'm doing in my repository.
Okay, so it's just a convention, kind of, to say, like, this is a working copy that you shouldn't mess with.
So, by default, every repository has at least one branch, because that's the way Git works, and the first branch it creates is called master. Okay? That's just convention. You don't need to have a branch called master. You've got to have at least one branch, but you can change the name of it. You can have several branches. You can have loads of branches, none called master. That's probably a bad idea, because then it makes it difficult to communicate with other people. But the technology doesn't stop you doing that.
Right.
So, but there are some conventions around for what these branches mean, and the convention is that the master branch is, as you say, is the one that's working. So I'll create a branch, blue buttons are cool, and I'll work on that till I've made all the blue buttons, and then when I've finished on that, then I'll merge that branch back into master. And now suddenly master, which is the version that's good, has blue buttons, and that's great because blue buttons are cool.
Let's not get into that discussion.
Let's not do that. So your master and my master, they're just what you're having in our own repositories.
A question. So first, Noreen says that the first PR is a nightmare.
Yep.
And then making the second PR and keeping up the fork up to date and stuff is daunting. And nightmare is powered up, exponential. And then we have a question. What if you need a fresh copy from master for your branch without losing changes? So I guess the question is, so what if you need a fresh copy from master for your branch without losing changes? Okay, so how do you update your branch? Let's say you're working on the blue button, but in the meantime, the master has changed and someone introduced a really cool image. How do you get that updated master into your blue button?
Let's not call it master.
Okay.
Because master generally gets used for this convention. Master is used for the branch.
Yeah.
The repository you based it on is often called origin. So when you start looking at GitHub tutorials and Git tutorials, they're talking about Git push origin master and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what that means. So origin is the conventional name for the repository that I based it on and where my changes get published to. So that could be sort of your version on GitHub.
Yeah.
And master is the name of the branch conventionally, which is the working version. Okay. So So in the short term, it's actually quite simple, because if I keep my changes in a branch, so then there's the idea of remote tracking branches. So I've got my branch, blue buttons are cool,
Right.
and I've got my master branch, and Git also knows about this origin repository, which is on GitHub. So I've got my repository on my machine, and this repository also knows about that repository on GitHub, which it calls origin. Okay? And then what I can do, and it also knows about a branch called master on origin, which it calls origin/master.
Right.
Because nothing if not original. So then what I can do is I can keep asking Git to keep looking at the repository on GitHub and updating what origin master points to. So as new commits come in, I can get refreshed. My local repository can be refreshed to what they are. So then I've got 3 branches I'm paying attention to. There's the blue buttons are cool branch that I'm working on. There's my master branch, which is my known good working version. And there's origin master, which is the one that GitHub thinks is working. And those 3 are separate. And then, but what you can do is that Git can shortcut it so that when it updates its knowledge of the origin repository, it can also say, well, master here should be a faithful copy of master there, and it will update it. So there's a git pull command which will do that. And this is really confusing to try and explain without pictures.
Yeah, no, I see, because you're like,
yeah.
But it's a great question, and it's when I work with Git and GitHub on a daily basis, and oftentimes because I work in a team, so other developers are also contributing and making changes to this origin master. So I often do. I have a short. So I do like a git fetch and git pull, which says, "Hey, are there any changes? If so, pull them down." So I have my local copy updated to the latest version. So that's just kind of like a part of your workflow, especially when you work in a team and you know that maybe some of your team members have been working on the project while you were away. It's just a practice of doing it. So like all the changes that have been made while I was not here, can you please get them down to me, to my copy, so I can have them?
Yeah. And that makes sense because when you want to publish your changes, because if you're making all the buttons blue, then if someone else been working on it and added 4 more buttons, you need to make sure you're aware of that before you do your all buttons are blue change. So you need to pull those changes in, and then you will do a merge between your blue buttons branch and the master branch. And once that merge has been done, then you can push that merge version back up to origin.
Yeah.
But that won't work if your version of what's on origin is out of date. Yeah. So you keep bringing in those changes to keep up to date. But because this is where the idea of branch comes in, if you're working on a separate branch, just because someone else is working on something, it won't affect what I'm doing.
Yeah. Which is like, it's good and it's bad. So it's good because then you have this, I don't know, a bit more control, because then nothing happens until you tell your computer to do something, right? Yeah. Like even if people are making changes to the project, until you tell Git like, hey, get me the changes, add them to my version, nothing's gonna happen, which is quite comforting, right? Because you're dealing with this abstract things and the black terminal, and you're like, but yeah, on the negative is like that sometimes it still does happen to me. I do forget to get the latest changes, and maybe I've actually worked on something that has already been done by someone else. I just forgot to incorporate those changes. But it's again, it's tricky also, because as a beginner or as a junior, you're expected to be proficient and confident in the art that is Git, but it's very difficult to get this experience if you self-study or work in a project that you are the only contributor to. So that's why open source is a really good way to go. So, and when I say open source, it doesn't have to be like a ginormous project. Like any project that is on GitHub essentially qualifies as open source. So that just means that it's public, like the code is publicly available. And if you are wondering how to contribute or where you should contribute to, I think it depends like on your interests, on your skill, and also on the project. So I would always look for projects that have good documentation, that have, so there's like, when you look for issues, so issues are things that the project owner would say like, hey, my buttons are lacking colors, can you add, so they would say issue, add button colors. So then there's like a lot of issues that are labeled as a good first issue. So that means that they're specifically out there for first time contributors, so that you can learn how to do that. Because we all know that it's like you can't be expected to be very good at this without practice, especially because it is intimidating. Because like you said, like everything is recorded and people have like it's out there, which I struggled with in the beginning, because you feel like I'm gonna first of all break
Everyone's
everything.
going to see my mistake.
Yes,
It'll be there for the whole world.
I shall be exposed. Wait, so let me see. So, but with git fetch or pull, aren't you losing changes, like your own changes?
No.
Correct. Yeah. So it's they kind of sit on top of you. So the only issue is that if you are touching the same bit of code, so if you are merging, like I said, sometimes I work on stuff that has already been done, and then I work on the blue button color, but someone already made it red, and then I try to fetch and pull, then it will say, hey, I can't add this change to your copy because you're virtually touching the same code. So then that's where you have to resolve, but no, your changes are safe. So Noreen says that branches are the way to go. So I think a good practice is when you have. So for me, like every time I work on the project, I create a branch, which is normally like so everything you do in a team should be descriptive and purposeful. So if I say, I don't know, I'm going to be adding colors to the buttons, I would create a branch called button colors, and I would try to, on that branch, only make changes that are touching the buttons. So I'm not going to go now and touch the images or this and that. Like I'm only talking about, I'm trying to be clear. So I will make the changes and then you push them.
So the other thing to note is that because it's got the idea of the separate repositories elsewhere in different places, if I create a branch on my local repository, no one else sees it. So I can make a branch and go off and explore and muck around and experiment with stuff and do whatever I want to and make whatever embarrassing mistakes I want to. Until I actually publish those changes, no one will ever see them. And what I can do is I can create a branch, get myself in an awful mess, something that I really don't want anybody else to see, and I can then just quietly delete that branch as if it never happened. And then I can carry on and do something else. So don't be afraid to create a branch, experiment and muck around with it, because you are still in control of what you see show the outside world. So you can create a branch, muck around with it, experiment, try something out, and then when you know what's going on, you can create another branch and do all the changes like you knew what you were doing all along. And the original one just goes away.
Snap, only took me 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's fine, yeah.
But yeah, I think we had a light bulb moment from Agatha. So she kind of summarizes the process here. So she says, so typically you would clone, so we can explain what's forking and cloning. And then work on your own branch, and then do commits, which are checkpoints, regularly. And when you're ready to push something, before you push, you would fetch the current version from the origin, and then your changes wouldn't be affected, Git would be smart about keeping them, yes, and then you would make a PR, and if it's accepted, this would be merged.
Yes.
Graduated. I get that.
Yeah.
You're ready for the world out there.
Yeah.
So can we explain the difference between forking and cloning briefly? Because we, in the beginning, when we made the example, you just forked the repository.
Okay. Yeah. So basic Git doesn't know about forks. It only knows about clones. And cloning is when I take a copy of a repository somewhere and bring it to my local machine. So that's what cloning is. So even if you're working on GitHub, if there's a repository on GitHub and I want it on my local machine, I clone it. So I just say git clone and I give the address of where the repository lives and it just magically appears on my machine. And that's cool. Forking is something that GitHub does, and other places like GitLab and Bitbucket and all these other sites that do similar things. They will have forks, which takes a repository that's in your user account and makes a copy of it in my user account, but it's still on GitHub.
Yeah.
So it's still there. It's not on my machine. Clone is how something goes from some other machine to mine.
Yeah. Yeah. So often when you read documentation and it says how do you use this product, it would say clone it and install something. So whenever you want to actually run the project copy, you will have to clone it.
Yeah.
And forking is oftentimes people fork just let's say this project is really cool and I want to kind of have it bookmarked, and you just fork it so that you have it in your user account.
Yes.
And like for all the simple change that we did earlier, like forking was enough, right? We didn't have to run the project because it was just text. So we don't have to download and see how the text runs because it's just plain text. But yeah, in any case, whenever you want to work on a project, you will have to clone it. And normally you will have to install some stuff so that you can run it locally.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And so the other reason why people may fork stuff is that if I fork it, I get the snapshot of the project or the repository at that point in time. So even if you go off and continue to make changes, I don't have to accept any of them because I've got my own copy.
Yeah.
And GitHub is keeping that separate copy for me, independent of what you're doing.
Yeah, so your fork won't get automatically updated, even if the main project is. Like it would just be frozen in time, like disconnected. We have
but there are also mechanisms where you can update it should you wish, but that's something you do.
Yeah, which is like, I think the main lesson here is that nothing will happen until you tell Git to do something. Because like I felt when I started Git is that uncontrollably things will occur and I will have no inputs and stuff will get deleted and destroyed and it will be all my fault. But I think we've learned today that it's all about commands that we know and terminology that we get to understand, and we tell the computer, hey, do this. Or like Neil said, if you want to just play around with a project and no one has to ever know no one has to ever know that you are an avid fan of purple buttons. And so we have because we're gonna wrap it up soon, we have a good question here. So the question is, are there any Git repositories that beginners can go and have a play? Like how would you get the experience of this pull requests and pushing and pulling and cloning?
So I don't know of any sort of projects out there that I could name and do things. What I have done and done successfully is the idea of if you're in a team and contributing to a team and working on a project, then it really helps to know the team and the people and have conversations with them and doing that. And then Git is just a vehicle by which you make the changes happen in the team. You contribute to the team. So find a good team first. And so what we've done in the past is we've set up sessions, face-to-face sessions, back when such things were allowed, where you get people in a room and they get them working on some stuff, and then they collaborate with each other. And because they all know the people there, it's really low stakes, and so people are quite happy to try stuff out and not worry about it. So I think the best thing to do is if you can find a couple of collaborators and just knock something up together. It doesn't need to be clever. If you're trying to explore how Git works, but people you're comfortable talking with and working with, and try to do something with that, and then use Git to allow you to communicate and collaborate with each other. I think that would be the thing I would do. And if you haven't got friendly people around you can discuss, then then find an open source project which has a good community around it.
Yeah.
You want people who are going to be supportive and welcoming, and so things like they've got good documentation. They clearly label requests as beginner friendly or issues as beginner friendly and stuff. They've got people around that seem to be helping. If you look at some of the histories of pull requests, are people being helpful when things aren't quite right, and then supporting people doing it. You want that kind of community.
Yeah, and I would just add to that first of all, I would encourage you to, especially if you're a complete beginner, to play around with the includeJS-TV repository. So it's just notes. Again, the idea is not that you create perfect notes. The idea is that you fork and clone and make your own changes and make a pull request. And it can be a funny thing or a silly thing or a useful thing or whatever. So if anyone wants to do that, they're more than welcome to do it. And then the other thing, I'm actually wearing a t-shirt called Hacktoberfest. So that's a thing that happens every October. It's kind of, the month of October is reserved for for contributing to open source as much as you can. And participants get like really cool swag. So that happens, hopefully it will happen this October as well. For sure, I'm gonna be helping people to do that as well. So every year, for the past 3 years, we've done, there used to be meetups, a thing called Meetup, where you met with people in a physical space. So we would do that, teach people how to do pull requests. And once you do 5, you qualify for the swag, which is really cool. So that's that. And like Neil said, there's a lot of open source projects that are itching to get new contributors. Sometimes it's can be quite simple stuff like just writing documentation or, I don't know, adding a translation or things like that. And again, the idea is that not that necessarily you invent this amazing new feature, but just that you begin to do the cycle of, all the stuff that we mentioned today. Yes.
Yeah, it'd be great if everyone could just come up with something that they learned from this stream. That would be great. And then take the include.js repository, fork it, make that change as we demonstrated in the beginning, and then put that pull request in and just get that process started, and work out is really quite easy. But we're both of us are around on Twitter, so if people have questions, you can ask us stuff, and then we can sort of help out.
Exactly.
And get people working and doing this stuff. And as you say, it's practice. You do it a few times, you get used to it, you understand what's happening, and then it becomes easier.
Yeah.
That first one is can be quite intimidating.
But I want to really stress out that you can't mess anything up. Even if your changes end up not being useful, you will not damage the project in any way, and no one will expose you or anything like that. So I do encourage you, if you want to learn how to use Git and GitHub, you can get in touch with me. So I'm on Twitter, and I'm super happy to help, and Neil is as well. He promised. So because it's really, like I said, it's really difficult to kind of get from 0 to comfortable. But once you're comfortable, is great. But it's very tricky to get on to that level on your own, because it's impossible, because you need a team, and you need to encounter these situations and conflicts and this weird stuff that happens when you work with other people at the same time on the same project. which is the experience that I will be happy to simulate for you in a way. So cool. I think if there's no other, there's been quite a lot of questions.
Okay.
Yes, so there's people are sharing some of their repositories. So Nareen has a haiku one. Agatha has one that needs. Oh, Agatha is offering a Polish translation to a project.
Brilliant.
And Nareen says GitLens. Yeah, there's a bunch of like software that you can use to. So instead of using like the terminal, you can use like a UI, so a user interface, and there's like extensions for text editors. But that's, I think, out of the scope for this.
Yeah, those are really good. Some of them tend to be a bit more limited. So as long as things are going well, they're really good. When things start going wrong, then you have to sort of step out of the confines. But on the other hand, I use a Git GUI user interface for my day-to-day stuff because it's just so much easier. But I can always drop back to the command line when things go wrong, and I can always drop back to the command line to just completely destroy the repository when I really muck things up, and I can just clone it again and pretend it never happened. I know GitLens Nareen, so that's to kind of visualize who has been working on the project, on Git history, Git graph. But command line is the best. We agree. It's the most powerful for sure. So I think because it's 1 hour and 15 that we've been doing this for. So the plan is, if there is a lot of enough of public uproar for advanced GitHub session. I'm happy to do more if people want.
Yes, then we'll do more in the future. In the meantime, if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you, Neil, for, I say volunteering, but actually he had no choice to do this.
Well, thank you for asking me so nicely.
Did I ask you?
It involved baseball bats, I think, but
Yes. So thank you all. Thank you to chat. And so we'll see you on, so today's Wednesday. So we'll see you again on Monday. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.